Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. This will be part 2 on this Farmall M series. The last video we got it started and got it running, but there was a hesitation and kind of a sputter on acceleration. The points are pitted, so we're going to replace those. And the carburetor is an unknown because I haven't had it off yet. I haven't inspected anything about the carburetor yet. So I have a feeling that the hesitation sputtering is probably a carburetor issue, but we don't know yet. We're going to start with the points, then I'll start it up, get it running, and see how she sounds. And if it's still hesitating and sputtering, then we'll move on to the carburetor. The previous owner sent me a new set of points, a new condenser, and a new rotor in the mail, along with the operator's manual for the tractor, so that was nice. So I guess we'll replace all of that stuff just because we have it. And loosen up the little nut on the post with the wire for the condenser, and then we can pull that wire out. Then we can remove the points. Now the points should just pop right off the post like that. We're going to put the bracket for the points in first before we even take out the old condenser, because it's kind of tricky to hold this in there and get it started without dropping the screw on the ground. Well, I had to switch to my fancy little tool here that holds the screw on the end for you. This is the only way I'm going to get it done, I think. That way I can just get it up in there, get her started. There we go. Then I can use the screwdriver at that point. Now we'll pop the old condenser out. You know, the condenser just tempers the spark that gets delivered to the points. So if the condenser is bad in such a way that you're getting arcing across the points, you're still getting a spark and the tractor will still run like that. But that arc is essentially like arc welding. It will cause the contacts to swap metal over time, and you'll end up with a pit on one side and a mountain on the other side, and that's an indication that the condenser was bad. But since we have a new one, we're going to replace it with the points at the same time. Now we're going to slip the new points over the post and get the tab here over this post. We'll get this wire from the condenser on the same post. Now we tighten the little nut. Now we just need to tuck this wire up in there so it's not interfering with anything. We can tuck it up behind the condenser a little bit. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. All right, now, can you see how the foot of the points is on the flat part of the distributor shaft? Well, in order to adjust these properly, these need to be on one of the lobes, one of the 4 rounded points. So to do that, we need to rotate the motor until that occurs. All right, now I'm going to go around the other side of the tractor and pull on the fan belt with my hands to see if I can spin it that way. A little bit more. Tad bit more. That's good. Okay. Now we just need to adjust this bracket here out this way to meet the other contact. Then we need to set that gap. So we'll loosen the screw just a bit, bring this all the way out. When I don't have service manuals and I'm just guessing at the gap, I usually shoot for somewhere between like 15 to 18 to 20. It just depends on the manufacturer, depends on the distributor. But because the previous owner sent me the operator's manual, I know exactly what the gap should be, and that's 13 thousandths on this one. Sometimes you got to do this a couple times to get it right. I need a third hand. All right, I got the gap set to 13 thousandths, and you want to make sure you clean these brand new points before you run them, because sometimes they have an oily residue from the factory. I usually use like a lacquer thinner or brake clean or something like that, just to get whatever film might be on there off. And I'm just running a super fine bit of sandpaper through the points one last time, and we should be good. Dust cover goes on, and then our new rotor, these can only go on one way, so you can't mess them up. And we're done. We're not done. I forgot one thing. I just like to put a little dollop of grease on the camshaft of the distributor. Not a lot, because you don't want stuff flying around and getting up there in between the point contacts, but just a good sized dollop, because the foot of the points always rides on the camshaft on the distributor. So if they're both dry, it's going to wear it down much sooner than it would otherwise. So just put a little bit of grease on there. All right, now we're done. All right, before we try to start the tractor, I just wanted to show you the condition of the old points. Can you see that is actually a crater? That's what I was referring to earlier. If the condenser is bad and it starts arcing across the points, you know, it will start swapping metal. Here's the other side of the points. I had already filed this side down because there was more of a mountain there, but you can still see there's some mountain left there, right? That metal came from the other contact. All right, I'm gonna start it up now, see how it sounds. Again, I think it's the carburetor, but I've been wrong before. Let's see. No luck there. Still doing the same thing. But at least we know we have good points in there now. All right, so we're moving on to the carburetor. I do have an original rebuilt carburetor that we're going to switch with this one. But first I want to get this one removed, and we're going to do an autopsy on it on the bench and see what we can see in there. I just think that something isn't right. It's probably just dirty, but let's find out. Here she is up on the bench. Just want to get a good look at the exterior of it first. unusual throttle butterfly design, like we mentioned, I think, in the first video. That's different from what you normally see. This screw here is the idle adjustment screw. This is the idle air fuel mix screw. This is the main air fuel mix screw. And looks like we've got a homemade type fuel inlet. I've made several of those myself. I'm not sure if we're going to keep the rubber hose or switch to a solid line. I broke this loose with a wrench and I'll just spin it off. Like I said, I'm not sure if we're going to reuse this one or not. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong with it. A little bit of a mesh brass filter there. Now the plan is to send this carburetor in for a core exchange. I believe it's worth $80 to me. So because of that, I'm not going to, modify anything on this. We're just gonna look. Well, there's a typical, little bit of rust and debris in there, but this one actually looks pretty good overall. But I tell you what, it only takes one little tiny piece of debris to get somewhere it's not supposed to be, and then these carburetors just don't work right. Now remember, the tractor was running, it was just hesitating on acceleration, so the carburetor was quasi working, but my guess is that something in here is just partially blocked and it's not letting enough fuel through on acceleration. It just stumbles. Here's how the throttle butterfly works. There's a rod that comes from the governor. Here it is on the tractor. This little tab fits into the notch inside the carburetor, and when you pull the throttle, this thing spins up to the right and turns the butterfly that way. All right, here's the rebuilt carburetor. It looks fantastic. Came with a new gasket there and one for the manifold there. All new hardware. So I'm not going to bore you with the installation. I'm just going to go install this on the tractor, and I'll bring you back and we'll try to get it started. So because I'm curious, before we start the engine, I want to see where the guy set these mixture screws to. I believe the top one is supposed to be like between 1 and 1.5 turns out, and the bottom one is supposed to be more like 3. Anyway, let's see where he put the idle mix. So that's half, 1, and just a little bit less than a half. So we'll put it back to where it was. Okay. All right, it's about 11 o'clock position there, so that's 1/2, 1, 1.5. Huh, okay, maybe I was wrong about the 3. He had it just a little over 1.5 turns out total. So I guess we'll start there, see if this baby runs smoothly finally. And by the way, I've had the fuel on for the last 10 minutes or so, and we've got no leaks out of the carburetor, so far so good. For just a minute. Well, I think I fixed the hesitation and sputtering issue, but now I'm hearing an intermittent knock from the engine that I had not noticed before. It doesn't do it all the time, it only does it sometimes. I can't tell where it's coming from. Sometimes you can't hear it at all. Sometimes it seems kind of loud. It's not the exhaust pipe up there or the rain flapper. I mean, that rattles around a little bit, but that's not it. So before I panic, I think what we're gonna do is just change the engine oil and test it again. I'm not sure what's going on, but that seems like the logical thing to try next. You know, the oil was a little thin when we checked it in the first video, but it's not making a lot of sense to me. Anyway, the new rebuilt carburetor seems to be good. Everything seems to be working there. So I think we can cross the carburetor off the list, but I got to find out where this noise is coming from. Hey, good morning everybody. It's the next day now. I think we're finally going to get a break from the rain. We might even see the sun today. As I'm laying there in bed last night, just about ready to fall asleep, an idea popped into my head that this strange noise could be a loose cylinder sleeve. And I'll have to play back the video, but I could have sworn I saw some green stuff come out of here before the oil started coming. The oil is, you know, pretty runny. So what if that idea is right? Let's think about that for a minute. The noise that I'm hearing is intermittent. It did sound like it's coming from the rear of the engine at the top, which would possibly indicate cylinder sleeve number 4. I'm just thinking out loud here, so just bear with me. If we did see green stuff come out before the oil, and we are getting a little bit of coolant contaminant in the oil, that could also possibly be a result of a loose cylinder sleeve. If the sleeve is popping up and down, maybe the seal is not working anymore or has gotten damaged, and we're allowing contamination. I know that's a big if, but that's the only thing at this point that makes sense to me, why the noise would occur only intermittently, and then now we're finding out we might have a little bit of coolant in the oil. So anyway, we're going to continue with the oil change and go from there. I also want to pull the spark plug. Well, we should probably pull all of them, but I want to pull the spark plug on number 4 and compare it with the others, because sometimes they'll have a different burn pattern on them. So if we're going to assume for a moment that it is a loose engine sleeve on number 4 or number 3, question is, well, how did it get that way? One of the ways you can end up with a loose cylinder sleeve is if there is a catastrophic failure, like in the block around the cylinder. If there's a crack right there, that will, you know, relieve pressure on the sleeve, and it will have room to go up and down. Another possibility is just the sleeves and the pistons are very, very old, and it has just come loose. It doesn't sound like a bottom end noise to me, so that's my guess at this point anyway. Tall end on top, squatty end on bottom. You know, maybe we'll get lucky and it'll just fix itself. But you mechanics out there know that that doesn't happen very often. And that's just kind of a dream. But a guy can dream, can't he? I'm using T4 Rotella again. This time I went to the Tractor Supply store and it was on sale this time for $15.99, and that's the cheapest I've ever seen it. I think the most I've ever seen it is somewhere around $25 per gallon. So $15.99 seems like a good deal. The oil capacity in this Farmall M is approximately 2 gallons. It's nice to have a big opening in the tractor and a big funnel. You can really dump that stuff in quickly. So as I put the second gallon in, I opened the top petcock on the oil pan. So we're going to leave that open, and when we see oil coming out of that top petcock, then we know we have enough. See anything yet? Oh, yeah, there we're getting some. Perfect. All right, we'll go with that. All right, I'm gonna start it up and we'll listen to it, make sure it builds oil pressure again after the oil change. And if it doesn't sound terribly bad, I'm just gonna let it run and get the engine warm and see if that noise goes away again. So the noise is still there. Yesterday I thought the noise was getting better when the engine warmed up, but it doesn't seem to be now. It seems to be kind of the same, and it's intermittent, so it's hard to pin down. Now the tractor is running a lot smoother than it was, you know, since we put the rebuilt carburetor on there, but it's still popping and missing every once in a while, and it shouldn't be doing that. So let's pull the spark plugs, see what they look like. Maybe we'll find some clues there. So here are the spark plugs. Number one is on the left, so they're kind of in reverse order. on the cardboard as they are in the engine, but it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 from left to right. You can see 1 looks pretty good, 2 looks okay, 3 and 4 look very sooty, not oily, but sooty, like it's running way too rich. But if it's running way too rich, how come number 1 doesn't look like that? Number 2 actually has a little bit of soot on it. Number 1 really doesn't. I'm not sure what to think about this. They should all 4 be the same, if nothing else. So if the spark plugs on 1 and 2 are clean, but 3 and 4 are very sooty and dirty, so the next logical thing is to do a compression test and see if 3 and 4 are different from 1 and 2. All right, I guess we'll start with 1 and work our way backwards. All right, I've got the throttle wide open and the ignition off. Well, it's about 120 on the dial, and I know that my compression gauge always reads a little bit low, so I would put this at 125 to 130. So far so good. Let's try number 2. Number 2 shows 110 on the gauge, so I'd put this one at 115 to 120. All right, here's number 3. Well, we'll call number 3 about 112 on the dial, so 117 to 122 is probably what it really is. Okay, here's number 4. Exactly the same as number 3, so we'll call that, 117 to 122. So the compression is good on all 4 cylinders. That is not what I was expecting. I was expecting either 3 or 4, or 3 and 4 to be down, but that was just a guess, of course. So I put the spark plugs back in, and then I said, well, let me test the spark plug wires. So I checked them one by one, and long story short, all 5 of them, including the coil wire, had terrible continuity. The ends weren't crimped on there very well. The wires themselves were very old and hard and brittle. So I went back in the shop and I spent probably 30 minutes making 5 new spark plug wires from scratch. So I'm still, not sure what's going on. So let's start it up again and see how she goes. I just cannot figure this out, guys. We've run it several times now since I changed the oil. I just want to see if there's any more coolant, evident in the oil. Well, I'm not seeing any evidence of coolant in the oil. It looks to be normal, nice and thick and fresh. Well, the spark plug wires didn't have any effect whatsoever. Even though the other ones, the continuity was not very good on them, I guess they were still working well enough. I don't know, what do you guys think is going on here? Maybe it just needs a valve adjustment? Maybe the valves are loose and we're getting a bunch of rocker noise back there on 3 and 4. So that's a possibility, but what about the coolant in the oil pan? Now, another thing that's a little bit puzzling is that the level of the coolant has not gone down since I've owned it. I checked it before we started it up for the first time, and it hasn't gone down at all. And we've run it quite a bit. So I'm confused about that too. Unless we have a really small failure in the head gasket and it's just letting a little bit of coolant by here and there. So I guess I'll stop for now and think about this. Maybe you guys can help me figure this out. But we got 3 things going on, I think. We have intermittent engine noise coming from somewhere on the top end, somewhere towards the rear of the engine. We had coolant in the oil, and the engine still has an intermittent miss. So I guess the most logical thing to try next is going to be a valve adjustment. Get the hood off, get the valve cover off, get our eyes on the valve components, and we'll see if we find any excessively loose ones or maybe some tight ones, and then we'll start it back up and go from there. And if that doesn't work, then I guess we'll have to remove the head, check out the pistons, and maybe even remove the pistons and the rings, and maybe one of those cylinder sleeves is loose. Maybe that's the entire problem. Anyway, we'll start with the valve adjustment before we do anything too crazy. But not to fear, I will get this figured out because this Farmall M is definitely worth the effort. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. As usual, I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.